Hello and welcome to the Let's Talk Near Death podcast, where we talk about life, death and experiences in between. I'm Kirsty Salisbury, the host of the show, and I trust that the conversations within this podcast will offer value, insight and information into what happens in the afterlife. To find out more about the free online community and extra content, be sure to click subscribe and to check out the links in the notes below. And now, let's get into today's episode.
Part of it was that when we die, we keep living just differently. Those of us that are still here can pray for those who have died and help them in their futures. I woke up and I knew in an instant that the second part of that was not my dreamscape and that I was being contacted. If you can accept the fact that your death is a normal part of your life, and there comes a point at which it shouldn't even be resisted.
Kia ora, and welcome back to the Let's Talk Near Death podcast. I am excited to be here again with another episode today. We are in season 13 and we are talking all about death experiences. So not just near-death experiences, but experiences that happen at the moment of death. So what someone might go through as they are dying, what loved ones or people around them might experience as that person is dying. It's a huge part of the conversation. I'm very excited to be venturing into this topic. And today I have another fabulous guest with us. Today I'm chatting with Father Nathan Castle. And Father Nathan Castle has been doing some amazing work. For 23 years, he's been helping stuck and not so stuck souls who have died suddenly and traumatically adjust to the afterlife. Now, this is going to get exciting, isn't it? This is so interesting. So these stuck souls or not so stuck souls might be victims of fires, of automobile accidents, of shooting, stabbing, drowning, suicides. All of these souls come to him in his dreams, seeking help to resolve their interrupted death experience. Father Nathan is also the author of Afterlife Interrupted and Afterlife Interrupted 2, where he addresses questions like, is death survivable? What does he do to help people cross over? Does time exist in the afterlife? Do deceased relatives help us adjust and move through our deaths? So many amazing questions in there. I can't wait to get into some of these answers. So Father Nathan Castle, welcome to the Let's Talk Near Death podcast.
I'm excited to be with you.
Oh, me too. I've been looking forward to this conversation for quite some time. I'm not familiar with too many people who are doing work, as you've mentioned here. Can you tell us a little bit about the work that you're doing? How did you get into this and how does this all take place?
This particular manifestation of it, as you mentioned in the intro, started about 23 years ago. I'm 66 years old. I'm a Catholic priest of 37 years ordination. And about 23 years ago, I was on a retreat in northern Arizona. I live in Tucson now. I was with a group of people, and during the night, I received a dream that was not my own psychobabble. It wasn't my ordinary dream material. It was it began like that. I was finishing a round of golf with a priest companion. We went into the bar, but the bar was the scene of a silent auction for a charity, which was familiar because I've run charities much of my life and fundraising is embedded in it. So all of that was normal at that point. But then I pointed out to my companion, look at that horrible piece of art on the wall over there, something donated. And I thought, who would give such a terrible thing to a charity? But I wanted to get a better look at it the way that we sometimes do when there's an accident on the highway. You know, we know it's awful, but we need to look at it anyway. And I went toward it and it moved toward me and kind of met me halfway. It was a screen before we had televisions on our walls. And inside the screen, like a short film began to play. It was of a man screaming on fire on the engine of a car. He hadn't been in an accident, not in an automobile accident, but somehow he caught fire sitting on an engine. And I didn't know why. He was screaming and I woke up. And I knew in an instant that the second part of that was not my dreamscape and that I was being contacted. The example I've used, Kirsty, is many priests have the experience of having to sleep with a pager on the nightstand at least part of the time. In case there's an emergency call from the hospital, you might have one night a week that's your night. And it felt like that, like the alarm going off, somebody needing help in the night. So I woke up and I prayed for them and I wrote it down. The following morning, I got with a companion who was on this retreat, who had been a prayer partner with me. And I said, would you pray with me over whatever this was? And that opened up this whole world.
Oh my goodness. Wow. How did you know what to do?
I just did things that seemed to make sense. I'd been taught to pray for people who had died from the time I was about 3 years old. I was raised in a Catholic household and not just taught the rules and regulations of a organized religion. I was really given a spiritual training and a cosmology and understanding of why I was here. And part of it was that when we die, we keep living just differently. And that those of us that are still here can pray for those who have died and help them in their futures. And so I had that practice even as a child. So anyway, I just prayed for the guy, and then we went and we wouldn't move into this kind of realm without protection. I'd like to say I don't pick up hitchhikers here or hereafter. It's not just safe to throw your consciousness out there for any wandering spirit, but I call on Saint Michael the Archangel and Holy Mary, Mother Mary, and a number of other saints and angels to keep us safe, and then just went into it and sat still and said, we're available. What would you like for us? How can we help? It happened that the prayer partner I was with, I knew that she had the capacity to allow her voice to be used to allow someone to speak through. She said, would it be okay if I allow him to speak? And I said, yes, I think that's the point. I think we're supposed to try to help him. So we spoke to him long enough to find out what his issue was. Essentially, we said, how can we help you? And he explained what he wanted, and we helped him get what he wanted.
Oh, wow. That sounds amazing. I've got to ask, what did he want? What was he going through, and what was he trying to communicate with you?
He had died about 40 years earlier.
Oh,
when I
that
was
long.
When I was a child. I was about 4 years old when he died. He died at only 20 years old in this fiery experience, accidental death. He was only married about 2 years at that time. He and his wife had a young child, and then he died, so young. But he had been taught that the reason that people die is because God takes them.
Okay.
And so he entered into his afterlife mad as hell at God. Who the hell does he think he is taking me just when my life's getting good? That's what he said. So he was acting upon what he knew. But we learned that he had been keeping track of his wife for the next 40 years while she remarried and lived into her 60s. But he explained that she was dying of cancer. And he was from Georgia, in our rural southeastern part of our country in the U.S. And he said she married her another man. She married her a lawyer, moved to South Carolina, but now she's dying, and I want to be with her when she crosses, but I can't the way I am. And so we had to say, well, then we need to figure out what that means, and we need to kind of hurry because cancer has its own schedule, and we want to make sure that you're able to do what you want to do and greet her. So if you can stop at any time you want, we're going to press some, and we're going to ask you to make some changes. And people don't always want that. Have you ever done any counseling? I don't really know your background.
I have, but not in these circles, not quite to this extent. Yeah.
I've been a pastor, and so I've done pastoral counseling, and very often people will make an appointment because they're in pain and they want something to change in their life, and they want you to help that come about, but they don't always want to change themselves. They kind of want the world around them to change, or
exactly. It's so tough.
So he was a little like that. He was reluctant, But we just said, look, you don't have to change if you don't want to, but you're the one who said you wanted to greet your wife. What we're doing is trying to help you. So we met with him about 3 times because we were trying to figure out what we were to do. And we kind of came upon a method, and we haven't ever had to have more than one appointment with anyone else ever since. But mostly we just moved our way through it a little at a time until we thought, for one thing, like he told us that he hadn't been with anybody since he died, because that's the way he wanted it.
Okay.
He was just mad at the world, and in the afterlife, he created his own little cell where he could still keep track of his wife, but that's what he wanted. And we told him, well, don't you think it would make sense to like practice with somebody? Shouldn't we try to get you moving and get you back into circulation a little bit? And he said, yeah, I suppose. So we asked him to think of someone who he would trust, who might come toward him, and he could size them up. So that ended up being his father. His father had died when he was 10, and he said, I didn't know him very well, and I was kind of afraid of him. And I said, well, did you guys ever have a really good time together as a father and son? That's just a little counseling technique. When people go low, you go high. You try to help them imagine something positive and hopeful. And he said, well, yeah, one time we went and looked at cars. And so I said, well, what if we were to invite him to come and be near you, but not too close, that he could stand where you could see him, and you could decide whether you feel safe and whether you want to talk to him, or maybe take a walk or something, go where he might take you just to get you moving. And that worked like a charm. That's all we did was ask, and he showed up, and off they went.
Oh, wow, that's amazing. I'm so curious. First of all, I'm thinking, how do you connect with the same soul again? And you said it was 3 times. How do you come and connect with that soul? Do they come to you?
Well,
you create a space?
I don't go. I only deal with those who come to me.
Okay.
And since I've been doing podcasts and have the websites and all of that, sometimes people essentially want a medium. They want you to go find their loved one and so on. And I just say, I don't believe that's my niche. My niche is to serve the ones who find me and help them. And he had done that. So, and he stuck around. All we had to do, I'm a Christian, and I'm a Catholic. We pray with the sign of the cross, in the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. And with preparation, with protection and quiet, we just say, Holy Spirit, would you please connect us to, this man's name was Ray, because we'd like to check on his progress. And it never took more than, 10 seconds. You know how when you make a long distance call, you live in New Zealand, don't you?
Yeah.
I would imagine a New Zealander makes lots of long distance calls.
I remember the days where we would phone the family in England, and there'd be a 5-second delay. So you'd say something, there'd be 5 seconds, they would reply 5 seconds. It was so difficult to have a conversation, but I know exactly what you're talking about, the delay. But
sometimes
you're saying it was pretty quick.
Well, on the line, it's mostly quiet, but you can hear little clicks.
Yeah.
That are some kind of connectivity. And it was a little bit like that. There was just a moment of connecting, and then we're able to talk. That's the way it worked, and still does. So anyway, they had a good talk. They went for their walk, and we worked with him a little bit. And the main thing I told him was, I think I know what the problem is, and I don't think you're going to like it. And he said, what? And I said, well, I just think when you talk about your wife, you sound like a caveman. You act like you own her, and you've been gone 40 years, and she has been married to someone else. You're the only person with whom she had a child. That's very important. And you're the only dead husband. I think you belong in a welcoming party, but I think you just need to calm down, have a little humility, and presume that because you're not the only one who loves you, you're probably going to be in a small group. And would that be okay? Could you get your mind around the possibility of being in a very small group of VIPs in this lady's life who get to greet her? And eventually he agreed to that. And the last time we spoke, the second to last time we spoke with him, we just said, hey, Ray, how's it going? And he said, big news, my wife passed. And we said, oh, well, tell us all about it. And he said, well, it was just like you said. I was there, and I belong there, but so did a few other people. And he said, you would have been proud of me. I behaved like a perfect gentleman.
Oh, cool. I love that.
So,
Yeah, even in spirit, we can behave well. Yeah.
yes, yeah. And so in the
Oh,
book, I call him Ray, the perfect gentleman. When it was time to say goodbye to him, we never use these stories unless we get their permission. And it doesn't seem proper when you're in the middle of helping them cross to bother them about a book you're writing. Yeah. Or hope to write. And so we come back sometime later and say, we wonder if we could talk to you just long enough to ask this simple question. And we presumed very brief conversations about a yes or no question, but they really did turn into rather sweet updates. Kind of with some of these people, you have a feeling of friendship, even though you only knew them in spirit and only for a short time. But he volunteered that after he learned how to do this, greet his wife. He said it was so interesting to me that I wanted to learn more about it, and I learned that there's a need of it. That there are people here in the afterlife who are greeters who welcome people who might have had a difficult time crossing. And he said, so I went to a school. He said, mostly I didn't like school and it didn't like me. They were always trying to teach me things I didn't want to know. But I finally had something I wanted to know, and I went to a school and they showed me how to do it. And so when it was time for us to say a final goodbye, I said, well, Ray, now that you are an afterlife greeter, I wonder if you wouldn't mind, and you know how to keep track of people on the earth because you watched your wife for 40 years. Would you mind keeping an eye on me? And when it's time for me to cross, I wonder if you wouldn't mind being in the greeting party. And he said, why, sir, I would be most honored. Just look for the perfect gentleman.
Oh, I love it.
And so whenever my time comes, I anticipate I'll finally get to see my old friend Ray.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. That's exciting, isn't it? I love that he mentioned that he went to a school and learnt how to do this, because as you were talking, we talk a lot about the welcoming team, and it comes up in many, many conversations about how our loved ones will be there, our family members. As you were talking, I suddenly had this idea, which I've never considered before, was based on Ray's attitude. Can some of our welcoming team be, I don't want to say negative, but come with resentment or not so welcoming?
No, I don't think so. At least not in the experience I've had. Sometimes we have family networks that are fraught with ugly divorces or bitterness that happened between one person or another, but then there's a wedding or a christening or a funeral or something, and people have to be in the same room or in the same church pew or something like that. What I've seen is that for crossing, it's gentle and non-confrontational. There'll be time later for more fraught relationships to be healed, but that's too early for that when a person is leaving the body and moving into the afterlife. It's just too early for that.
I was also taken back by Ray waiting 40 years. Now, I understand that the concept of time is very, very different when we're outside of this physical realm that we're in right here. But he'd spent 40 years watching his wife carry on with her life, watching her remarry, having these feelings of something needs to be done. He was being held back, and you were saying that he needed to change. It seems, I don't know, I just feel kind of sad for him. I felt really sad. And then I love that the friendship came out. So then I felt happy about that. But
well,
do you think it's normal that that spirits would be in this place of dwelling on what they've lost?
I don't think it's normal, although I don't think it's extraordinarily rare either. You probably know a few people in your life that are somewhat stuck because they formed a certain idea about themselves and their lives and operate out of that information, even if it's unhelpful, especially persons with addictions. Very often will want more of what harms them. And sometimes people just pass that way. It doesn't mean that they're fated to be that way forever, but they still do have to take part in changing. There's nothing magical about spiritual growth. You have to choose it. But you'll have all the help you need when you do.
Well, that's the thing. That's what we hear as well. And that's what I believe is that we go on to something better, that we have help, that we have all the teaching and the support and the love. And my little glimpse into what's beyond this world was just incredible. So I find it really interesting that he could be there. So do you think that spirits can choose not to move on? Is it a choice that he made, or is it some spirits, especially in
They can,
accidents,
although
might
they don't
have
so
this?
much frame it that way. They sometimes they just get in a habit. There's a woman named Wilhelmina in one of my books whose husband died in front of her. He just dropped dead.
Wow.
And she was so shaken. They were in their retirement and really enjoying it, the quietude and sweetness of their marriage at that part of their life. And he just dropped dead in front of her, and she dissociated. She started behaving according to what she thought people expected of her, because she didn't know what else to do.
Yeah.
She felt so hollow that she just kept conforming to what she thought was expected of her, because she didn't know how to behave. And she went all the way to her grave years later that way, and into the afterlife that way. And so she moved relatively slowly toward healing, because she had gotten so used to being sort of a passenger in her own life's journey. And she had to be encouraged by helpers that, no, we will help you all we can, but you must do the steering. We can't do that. There's some things that can't be done for you. You have to choose, and you can choose a slow pace. We will work with whatever you give us. It reminded, I just finished some physical therapy for a lower back problem, and physical therapists know where they know what they want to accomplish in you, but it's still your body.
Totally. You have to do the exercises and put in the time, don't we? Yeah.
And sure. And if they have a clientele of, dozens of people, they probably see a full spectrum of people that are going relatively slowly and not doing their exercises, to people that are, that are really hot to trot and want to get it all done this minute. I think that's pretty normal.
Exactly. I'm curious to ask you, Father Nathan, have you had any insights from souls that you've helped around the moments of death? We've talked about the welcoming party, but around what actually happens in those moments of physical death.
A lot of them have told us of what they remember. Sometimes, all of the ones that I deal with went through trauma.
Okay, so like accidents or sudden death.
Yeah, the lady that I just mentioned would be an exception to the rule. Her trauma really happened not at her death, but at her husband's death. She later died a natural bodily death, but almost all of the people that I helped died. They went from being healthy one minute to dead the next. But one of the things that's been very consistent is those who died in things that were particularly awful, fires, shootings, plane crashes, very often, or automobile accidents. Very often they were taken out of body by their guardian before the moment of impact.
Yes. Yeah. Yes. I love this. I hear this quite often. And I'm actually just rereading Michael Newton's book, Journey of Souls, at the moment. And he's just talked about this, about how they can come out of the body before the moment of impact, before that trauma really hits. And I really hope so. My own father, actually, he died in a plane crash. And so I just trust that that happened for him, that he didn't have to go through that awful collision point. So they can come out of their bodies before the death moment happens.
Yes, and in my experience, they're assisted by what I call their guardian angel. Other people might call them, spirit guides or beings of light or whatever you like. But I'm a Catholic, and I grew up with guardian angel, and it's very consistent whether a person had a religious belief or not, that they speak of their guardian, their companion, their buddy, whatever they call them. And even when they died kind of in a snit, the way that Ray did, wanted everybody out of here, everybody leave me alone. Some people do that. They create some sort of isolation cell because it's what they choose. But their guardian won't leave them. The guardian will go to the edge of the cell. Whatever it is that you create, they'll go to the edge of it. And they might be silent, but they watch you. And they let you know that you're not absolutely alone because the universe just doesn't permit that.
I love that too. I often talk to what I call my spirit teams. So that could be guardian angels, spirit guides.
Yeah.
I often chat to them. And when I feel things are really out of control or the world's just happening too fast, talk to them. And I find great comfort in that. And it's lovely to hear that they're a common feature once people have passed or in those moments of actual death. So
they are. And then for those who had some training, religious training that involved angels, they might, have wings, or they might show up glowing, and then or others, they'll just be some guy that hangs out with them. They can conform themselves to whatever would be most helpful.
Mm, mm. I want to ask a slightly tricky question, which is around souls getting stuck. I get a lot of questions come through around, I'm going to use the word ghosts, paranormal, where they seem to be stuck. They can't quite cross over and they're in between two worlds. Have you come across many cases of that where the souls feel that they can't move forward rather than choosing not to?
A little bit. And those have come over the years as I only wrote about this and published for the first time in, I think, 2018. So I was doing this work for a great many years before I went public with it, mostly because I was a university pastor and I just thought the stories were so wild that it might interfere with the regular work of a campus pastor and priest. But when I started going public with these and getting on shows like yours, people began contacting me through my website and bringing whatever their questions were. And some of those have been people that have a ghost in their home. And so I've coached people. I try not to take over for them and be the expert. I just try to help them. I listen to what they're already doing and suggest things. One of the important things, I think, is to ask whether a person feels safe or not. If you're around some spiritual being that seems to be a piece of the surroundings, do you feel safe? Do you feel threatened? Because you shouldn't have to put up with that. And I can teach them how to do some prayers that are prayers of protection that can make you safe in your own home. I just believe that's we have a right to that. But then how to make some negotiation, almost like with a roommate. We're both here. We're both here, and here are. But I'm paying the rent. I'm paying the mortgage.
Yeah.
And I get an outsized say in how we'll live together. But and then you make your little list. No going in the children's bedrooms. No loud noises after 10.
Wow.
Something. I've seen it work where reasonable people, spirits are people, and then if there's a possibility of it, I'll try to suggest to them. I remember asking this one woman, "Can the spirit you live with hear me right now?" We were talking on a Zoom call, and she said, "Yes, she can." And I said, "Well, then if I address myself to her, she'll hear me?" And she said, "Yes." I just checked. She said, "Yes." And so the reason that this lady was in this house, I don't in the United States, before our civil rights movement, it was a common practice in the United States that African American people could be denied housing in certain neighborhoods. Banks wouldn't loan money for mortgages. Realtors wouldn't even show houses to people of color in certain neighborhoods.
Terrible.
And it was just the law of the land. And this particular lady was African American, and she and her husband had their eye on this particular house that they thought was their dream home, but because of their color and the way things were done at the time, they weren't allowed. But then the laws changed, and they were able late in life to buy their dream home. And he eventually died. She survived him, and she lived in the house until her death. But then at her death, she didn't leave it. She stayed in her dream home, and then other people moved into it. And so that became the issue. So I just
Yeah.
said to her, if you've already, I'm a Christian, and I asked her what if she was, and she said, yes, I'm a Christian. And I said, well, do you remember when Jesus, near the end of his life, it's in chapter 14 of John's Gospel, said to his followers, in my Father's house, there are many mansions, else why would I have told you I'm going to prepare a place for you? But when I do, I will go prepare a place for you, and I'll come back to you so that where I am, you also can be. I'll take you home to me. So I said to her, um, can you imagine your house having wings or being on wheels? Some houses are on wheels. Since you've already found your ideal home, why not just allow the Lord to move it to the next level? Then you could share it with your husband and with other people, because right now you're just a kind of solitary ghost rambling around in a house. And said, what do you think of that? And she said she'd be willing to try it. So I said, well, let's just try it out. Let's ask God the question, is this possible? Could it be? And we asked that question, and things started moving. And she said, it will happen now if I let it. And I said, well, do you want to let it? And she said, yes. And off she went with her house. And
Wow.
and the lady that was actually paying the mortgage got to live in it without this ghostly companion.
I bet she was happy. Yeah.
They both got to live in it, just on different realms.
Different realms. Wow, isn't that interesting? Because I know we can get quite attached to physical objects, whether it's a house or a car or a relationship, a person. So to think that we could actually have that in the afterlife as well is quite interesting to me. Yeah.
Sometimes the earthbound spirit it stays in a place not because they're so delighted to be there, but they were frightened at the time of their death, and they know that they're at least safe right now, and they're frightened to move.
Yeah.
So they'll stay in one little place that they've gotten accustomed to. But if you can help them to imagine a way out of it where they're still safe and where they're not tricked or something, it's still up to them, but they might be able to, opt to allow themselves to be shown a new place.
So in many of the conversations that I've had where you hear stories, and what I've experienced as well, is the white light, and sometimes the void, place of nothingness, the tunnel, we hear of feeling warmth and welcoming. Is there a reason why someone may not automatically experience that?
One that I have seen is the content of one's imagination is enormously important. What you imagine. I mean, you invited me to be a guest on your show, and we've never met. But somehow you learned about me, and in your imagination, you conjured the idea of, wouldn't it be cool to have Father Nathan as a guest? And then you
is.
I'm trained in Aristotle and Thomas Aquinas, and they both teach that nothing can come to exist until it first exists in imagination. That everything, I'm looking at a bookshelf behind you. Somebody had to have designed it. The bookshelf existed in the mind of someone before they got busy and put the parts together and created it. And when people pass, they sometimes have their imagination full of something unhelpful. For example, a terror picture of what happened to them at the last minute. You're familiar with PTSD?
Absolutely.
And the trauma loop that some people can be in their imagination, they keep reliving a violent event. It's something like that. They sometimes can loop and just stay in a scene that they were in, and until they make a choice to try something else, they just stay in it, not because they're being punished. They've just made a choice that eventually we hope they will unmake, at least for a little bit, to try. Oftentimes working with people that are in a trauma loop, you just try to get them to take a break. Let's put that aside for just a short time, and then show them that they were able to do it. You had the willpower. You're the one that made it stop, even if it was only briefly. And you can begin to expand that. You can begin to make this something almost like AA.
Yeah. I really like
people,
that.
yeah, people are not told, they're not made to pledge on their first day in an AA meeting that they will never have another drink. They're not, that's not it at all. They're just accompanied, and one step at a time. If it's 1 minute at a time, or 10 minutes at a time, or an hour at a time, or a day at a time, they have that motto, 1 day at a time. But for some people, they have a day is just too big.
Yeah. And I certainly believe in the little moments, the little things make the big things. And even 1 degree, 1% of change a day, 1 minute of sticking to our goal, sticking to our path can make a massive difference over time. So, yeah, definitely the little things.
And then sometimes if they allow their guardian to be a speaking actor in their life, and a coach, a companion, they build that relationship, and the guardian will at some point say, would you please let us do something different? Let's try this other thing just for a minute. We could leave this scene behind, and we could explore what other options there might be for you.
In one of your books, you ask the question, is death survivable? So I'm curious to hear your take on what you mean by is death survivable? Is death is it a thing, a final thing? I'm having trouble to explain what I mean here. Is death something which happens, or do we go through it and out the other side of it?
I like to speak of it as analogous to birth. You have a certificate somewhere that says down to the minute when you left the womb.
Yeah.
But so you were born at a certain moment. Sometimes they have trouble deciding when did a person die, because you can have brain death or, artificial respiration or whatnot. There can be different measures of when is a person dead. But anyway, I think birth and death are very similar in that there's a leaving of one environment and coming into another. But there's a moment where that process reaches a certain point of something like completion.
Okay. Yeah.
So it can be both momentary and gradual. You grew in the womb for 9 months, bit by bit by bit, and then you left.
Yeah.
So it was both. And I think death can be very much like that, especially for people that have an illness that gives warning of their approaching death. People that are in hospice, where there's a continuum and it's quite clear your death will be in the not very distant future. But even for those for whom it comes suddenly, there's still a leaving, and then there's a something else, and the something else is really largely up to the individual and how cooperative they are with the help that is given them.
That makes sense to me, that it isn't just a sudden thing, because I often think, is death survivable? Death it's just something we go through. You can't not survive it, but I'm going to have.
And I think after a while, if you can imagine yourself in the afterlife for some period of time, after a while, people are not even going to want to know that. How did you die? Like at a cocktail party in the afterlife? I mean, well, I never saw the bus coming, or that heart attack or that whatever. It's just not that conversational. It's just not that interesting after a while, because everybody went through it. We don't talk very much about how we were born. When's the last time you asked somebody about the circumstances of their birth?
Or someone remembered what it was like. Exactly. So
that just doesn't come up very often.
Yeah. I'm curious to know, Father Nathan, your perspective on the afterlife. What do you think happens at the time of death? What do you think the afterlife is like, with your beliefs and all the work that you've done, the experience you've got? What do you think happens?
Well, it'll be different. It'll be different for different people. If you can accept the fact that your death is a normal part of your life, and there comes a point at which it shouldn't even be resisted, that there's an inevitability about it. I just the other day helped a woman who was near her death, but she said, I don't know whether I'm still supposed to fight or not. She was 87 years old, and she was being told by some of her relatives to fight this. And her body was giving up. And she said, I think I'm about to the point where the fighting isn't really the focus any longer. And I said, I think you're right. I think it's more about acceptance now and preparedness for that. I'm looking forward to reunions.
Yeah, me too.
And one thing that I hold out hope for is that if there's anything that I or anybody else really felt deprived of in this life, I'm not very big on regrets, but I wished I'd been more athletic, had more natural athletic talent, and I wouldn't mind if in the afterlife I had a bigger share of athletic talent. I'd like to be a better golfer or whatever. I anticipate reunions with loved ones. I try to do the best I can now to be at peace with all people, so that I don't need to say to the Lord, please make sure I don't run into so-and-so. I have, in part of my prayer life, I at least pray for reconciliation between me and anyone who might not be happy to see me. Try to let it be known on my end that whatever it was that went on between us, I hope that we can find our way back to each other and not leave some sort of a tear in the fabric of the afterlife. I pray about that from time to time. I see these schools all the time. You mentioned you like the idea of the school. The schools come up all the time that people want to learn things
in the afterlife.
Yes, there's just an infinite number of things to learn. Sometimes they just want to learn something simple, like how can I keep tabs on my spouse, or people that left before their children were raised. Parents that die while their children are still young. Very often they want to know what's allowed. Is there a way in which I can still take part in my children's upbringing at all? And so they learn some skills around that. And then other times there are people that were naturally compassionate and maybe who worked in healthcare or some sort of helping profession, and their compassion goes with them, and they're shown afterlife ways that it can be expressed. People still need each other. Yeah.
I love how we can still connect with the loved ones that we've left behind, that there can still be that connection, because I believe we are connected, that we are all combined together. Yes. And it's beautiful to see that can flow over between these different worlds, different realms. Super, super lovely. Are there any questions which you have been asked, or any really interesting conversations which have come up as you've been doing this work to help these souls to cross over?
I'm not asked questions that much, because the work that my prayer partners and I do, I compare us to the discharge staff in a medical center. Okay. If you've ever had to stay a number of days in a hospital, there's someone on the last day, on the day you're released, that it may be a social worker who makes sure you understand your medications, your physical therapy schedule, your ride home, your nutrition. We're a little bit like that. So there's been all this other healing work that preceded us, and they'll make reference to it. They'll say, when I first got here, I was this way, but then other people helped me and they moved me forward through different things that I needed to understand or come to clarity over or to leave behind. And then our part is to get them in motion, to move them. That's why I use the word unstuck in the subtitle of the first book, to help them move. We got rid of that word in the second book because we really began to see that some of them were never stuck. They were in the appropriate place. They just needed intensive care. They needed more than normal folk because their death was so hard. So we haven't gone into murders or into particularly awful things that people do to one another. And sometimes people have been the subject of really awful treatment by other human beings that one would clearly understand would take some work to get over, move through. And so sometimes we've worked with people like that, or sometimes suicides.
Yeah, can we talk about suicides? Because I feel like that's quite a relevant point. Are
Sure.
there are there differences you see, or
Well, I have two suicide stories in the second book, and both of them go back all the way to the 1930s.
wow, that's a long
And I
time.
think the reason that though, and they manifested inside the same dream, which hardly ever happens, but it was two separate stories that were like a tableau. It just flowed, and those two stories were both suicides, both from about the same time, although they didn't know one another. But the fact that their taking of their lives was so long ago, they were able to allow me to share them because they said anybody that would remember us has to think back 80 years now. You're not going to be opening an old wound by telling our story publicly. But in their cases, they each had reasons for what they did, and they explained what they were. In the suicides that I've dealt with, they're all a bit disappointed that they didn't make everything stop, because that's a big motivator for persons at the moment of suicide, is wanting this to stop. And they don't really get that, but they do get a lot of support, and then they just have to start choosing it. They have to start cooperating with the support that they have. They're not judged, even if they anticipate that they will be. They might have had religious or other training that taught them they'll be held to pay if you commit suicide. And they're told, one of them I remember saying, well, we weren't where you were at that time, but we are where you are now. It's really not our place to have an opinion about that event. Our role is to help you right now. And
Yeah, yeah.
And sometimes they in one case, this one woman that's in book 2 just said, I won't let you tell my story if you're going to shame me with religion. And I said, she said, you're a priest, and if you're going to have to shame me with religion, if they make you do that, I don't want any part of it. And I said, nobody makes me do anything I don't want to do. I'm a free man, and I would not do that because it's wrong, and I wouldn't want to hurt you. And she said, very well, then I'll cooperate with you. And so she let me learn of her story. It's in the second book. She was a big band singer in those years when, with all those clarinets and, back in the 40s, that big band era music. She was, I think even earlier than that, the late 30s, she was a singer in one of those. She was the only female in the group, and she was only 18 when they recruited her. She'd never had sex and had to sing all these songs about romances and broken romances and stuff. And the boys in the band began to help themselves to her.
Oh,
they had a key to her hotel room, and she got pregnant by one of them and took her life because she just didn't see a better way out. But she said, I took matters into my own hands, is what she said. And but I try, when I tell those stories, I try to make sure I'm not making suicide look attractive to anyone who might be considering it.
It's a tough one, isn't it? Because that comes up a lot in these conversations where we talk about how wonderful it is on the other side and after death, how great it is. But there's a reason we're here as well.
There's still hard work to be done for people that have hard issues to work through. And
that's what I've heard.
And suicide still leaves behind a lot of collateral damage to other people. And so I wouldn't want to glamorize it at all. But I've been with people that have been through it and worked through it, and we're not shamed or punished, but they do have to live in the truth. And part of what they have to do is at least see that part of their homework at some point is going to be somehow healing the damage that decision wreaked in the lives of other people. Although sometimes they want to work on that prematurely, and they're told it's not timely yet. Good idea. Hold that thought, and we'll let you know when that's timely. But for now, let's work on these things.
Yes, everything has its time, even beyond here. Yeah.
Well, you might have had. Have you ever wanted to apologize to someone who didn't want to hear the sound of your voice?
Oh, definitely. Yeah. I think we've all been there.
Well, and you can get on your high horse and insist that because you're ready to apologize, the other person is now obligated to listen to your apology, and that's just no good. And there's something like it in the afterlife. You have to wait until there's some receptivity. Even in the 12 steps of AA, you're not turned loose on your family and friends to go apologizing here and there because of your behavior. You're told to discern whether that would cause more harm than good, and only do that in those areas and circumstances where it might be welcome. The others, you leave it alone.
Makes sense though, doesn't it? Yeah. Oh, it's so interesting. Thank you so much for sharing some of the experiences that you've had, the work that you're doing. I find it fascinating. It's raised some questions for me that I need to kind of put my head around, which is really good. I love that. I love it when I start to think of new things. I'm one of the most curious people that I know, and I've always got questions, but I found it really, really interesting to hear some of your stories and understand a little bit more about what might be happening. If you are listening to this and you are keen to check out some of Father Nathan's work, his books, Life Interrupted and Life Interrupted 2, the links are down below in the show notes. So just pop down below. There's also the link to his website, and highly encourage you to go through and have a look at the amazing work that he's doing. Father Nathan, thank you for your time. Thank you for everything, and God bless.
Excellent. Great to be with you.
Thanks for joining me for another episode of the Let's Talk Near Death podcast. Don't forget to subscribe to stay updated with all of the events we have going on, and to visit www.letstalkneardeath.com to join the VIP community.